Okay, so we're right on time. It's noon of June 23rd, 2021. Welcome to the GTAP conference, the 24th annual conference on global economic analysis, global food system opportunities and challenges. This is session number 7, entitled CGE modeling and IO table development. We have 2 presentations today. Our host for this virtual session is Alfredo Cisneros Pineda, and my name is Angel Aguiar. I'll be chairing this session. About the 2 presentations, we'll begin with Arif Rashid from the Center of Policy Studies at Victoria University in Melbourne, Australia. He will be presenting us a financial computable general equilibrium model to assess the economic-wide impacts of strengthened bank capital requirements in Indonesia. So a very applied work using a model, an extension of the CGE in general. We will be he will have 20 minutes to present, followed by 10 minutes discussion. We'll have some time to transition, and we will then followed by construction of a global input-output table embedding the Chinese provincial multi-region input-output table based on the GTAP database. So I remind all the participants to remain muted and to submit your questions via the chat. I will then do it so during the presentation, so we can collect a few questions, so that when the presenters are done, I can then read them and they can respond to it. We have Ginger in the audience. I don't know if there's any special announcement or we're just interested in the topic. Okay, very good. Fantastic. So without further ado, Arif, please take it away.
Well, thank you very much. I share my screen. Can anyone see my screen? Okay. Thank you everyone for attending this presentation. Today I'm going to present to you my research about strengthening the bank's bank's equity capital in the context of strengthening financial stability, but also assessing the impact to the real economy using the computable general equilibrium modeling framework. So the outline here, I'm gonna explain to you the policy background, why I'm having this simulation and the modeling framework, and then the modeling aspect itself. And I also highlight some, actually just few important simulation results. As a background, as you may already know, after the global financial crisis, the banks for international settlement, especially under the Banking Supervision Committee, proposed the major overhaul of the financial regulation, especially in the banking absorptive capacity to the losses. In one side, we all know that having more capital in banking liability side can strengthen bank resilience to this shock, but on the other side, it costs for the economy. Some research highlight some costs to the real economy, especially they explained clearly for the advanced economy, but to my knowledge, there are still few analysis, comprehensive analysis in the context of emerging economy. So these papers, this research analyzes the wide economic impact of 100 basis point increase in the capital adequacy ratio what I mean by 100 basis point is increasing 1% of, for example, capital adequacy ratio by from 10% to 11%. That's it. And analyzing the impact using the financial CGE. So in the formal definition of a capital adequacy ratio is can be formulated in this equation that it is actually states the bank's equity issuance and the equity held by all of the asset agents divided by the thing we call the risk-weighted assets. Risk-weighted assets means that the assets of the banks multiplied by risk-weighted defined or determined by the authority. So for example, if the banks holding more equity and then the equity in their asset side considered as a more risky assets, so the bank's risk-weighted asset will increase. So increasing the capital adequacy ratio. Before that, for example, if the banks has the 10% of capital adequacy ratio, it means that every expansion, every $1 expansion of the risk-weighted asset sides, for example, like credit side, the banks must accompany that expansion by issuing a 1 cent of the equity in the liability side. So it's a kind of buffer. So the increasing CAR can be obtained by increasing the equity or reducing the asset expansion of the bank, reducing the credit from the bank or financing to the real economy. So in the model structure, I went through 3 steps, but actually the first step is not really relevant to this research. It's just the steps in my learning process in developing the CGE model. Actually, I built a models, the national models, the real dynamic national models for Indonesia, but that I call it a model of economic linkages for Indonesia or MENIA, based on the mini Monash model that was developed by Professor Peter and Professor Mori from the Center Policy Studies. And then I connect the financing aspect of the real sectors, real CG model, so-called, I call it the core model, with the financial module, which is the this is the modeling of the financial sectors in economy, how the financial instrument flows from the liability agent to the asset agent. So this is the representation of the flow of the fund. In the row, we have the liability agent. This is a financial module. I'm talking the financial module here, this one. So the plus here is actually represented in this table. So the column is the liability agent, consists of industry, non-housing agent. These are all financial agents, the central bank, banks, financial institutions, government, household agent, rest of the world, and housing sectors. In the row, there are asset agent, which is exactly the same as the liability agent. So for example, the F cells here represented how much that housing need to rise, how much liability that housing need to issue and help by the asset agent, which is here is the banks, or simply it's a banks financing to the housing sectors. So summing up all of the liability of the housing is the financing of investment in the real sectors, housing investment in the real sectors. So for the net issuance of the liability of the industry in the financial module is the financing of the investment in the real sector. So the net liability issuance of the government is the financing government deficit. And the net asset acquisition of the household is the domestic saving, the saving of a household in the real side model, the core model. And the net acquisition of the asset of the rest of the world is the financing current account deficit. So those are the linkages. So every liability agents and the asset agent in the financial modules behave as a constraint optimizer. As a liability agent, they're concerned to minimize the total liability at the end of the year, subject to the financing needs during the year. And the asset agent, they choose the portfolio combination, portfolio in the asset sides that maximize the asset position of the at the end of the year, subject to the budget available during the year. So the optimal solution in the percentage change is the liability agent is a function of the liability needs during the year and negative relative rate of return of the specific liability instrument. And the liability issuance percentage at the end of the year is the function of the total budget available to buy the assets and positive function of the relative rate of return of the specific instrument. So as we try to model the bank's capital adequacy, so the equity tie with the capital adequacy ratio defined by the central bank, by the authority. So this has to exclude it from the optimization process. So it's basically saying that we exclude the optimization process of the equity in the liability side of the bank. So this is a result, not result, this is a policy shock. This is what I mean by increasing 100 basis point of the capital adequacy ratio. As we expect before, that the increasing capital adequacy ratio can be done by increasing the equity issuance here. So as we can see here, the equity increase. However, the bank's liability is not allowed to expand. They constrained by the needs of the financing during the year. This is the data constraint. So they have to substitute increasing equity, but something has to decrease. The bank's optimal solution, they decrease the issuance of the bonds and deposits. Because the total sales of the bonds and deposit is higher than the share of the equity, the total liability decreases. So the question is how bank attract more equity. The bank attract more equity by implementing the higher rate of return and equity, and likewise the deposits. They have to reduce the rate of return on deposits and bonds. So we back to the principle here. We can increase CAR by reducing the assets of the bank, asset sides of the bank. So these figures confirm the setting we have made before, that the equity, which is considered to be riskier for banks, reduced, so it drags down the total assets and also the risk-weighted assets. Compared to other assets, the equity decreased by more than other because it's riskier for bank to have this position. In the industry point of view, as the banks financing becomes more expensive, they decrease the loan from the bank and try to substitute to other instruments like bond and equity. So the liability side of the banks is not really negatively impacted. They can, by the substitution, they move to the baseline in the following year after the policy year. But it is not the case in the housing financing. As we know that housing financing has limited alternative financing faced by the liability agent. So as the loan from the banks reduce, they try to as much as possible to switch to equity. But we haven't heard that the housing financing is financed by instrument like a bond, for example. So there is no really alternative available here. So the liability, as we can see here, doesn't really return to the baseline in the following year. So we can assume we can interpret the housing financing is more bank resilient than the industry financing. So this is from the foreigner point of view, because the bank's equity is more attractive. The foreigner are likely to put more investment in the bank equity. So as we expect before that, the real housing is more negatively impacted than the non-housing investment, because the substitution effect is work quite well in the non-housing investment, non-housing agent, the industry agent. However, in terms of magnitude, we see here, this is the impact of 100 basis point increase in capital adequacy is not that doesn't really impact the real investment too much. As we can see, it's only 0.02 to the baseline, from the baseline. So we expect the impact is not really significant. And also we see the GDP expenditure, the real GDP declines, the import activity declines, the real private consumption decreases, and then here the public consumption we set as the exogenous variable, so it is not impacted. The export increase is due to the lower domestic price that caused the decrease in terms of trade. As I said before, this is the domestic price. The GDP deflator declines. As we this is also we know as the producer wage. As the producer wage decrease, but there is a nominal rigidity in the models in the first year. So the producer need to reduce their factors, but they're constrained by the fixed capital stock in the short run. So they have to decrease the employment by more in the policy year. All right, this is the price that I mentioned before. And also, as the term of trade decrease, there is the improvement in the current account deficit. It means the less foreign financing requirement. And also, as the less foreign financing requirement, it impacts the nominal exchange rate to be appreciated. For the central bank, I put the Taylor rule in the financial module. So to some extent, the central bank responds to the negative shock to accelerate the economic recovery. So the conclusion is 100 basis points increase in bank's capital adequacy ratio doesn't really have a significant consequences to the economy. Yes, the bank's balance sheet reduce, and the banks try to move away from the risky assets. there is a reduction in the physical capital formation, yes, but again, it is not really significant, only 0.02. Yes, there is a decrease in the GDP. The central bank tried to reduce the impact of the negative impact of the policy, and the real investment decrease, external financing requirement as is reflected in the appreciation in nominal exchange rate. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. All questions are welcome.
Thank you, Arif. So let me check out the chat box. Actually, I had closed it. Can you see anything in the chat, Alfredo? Not seeing anything. Okay. Let me then ask you some questions until people get warm up. So very interesting presentation. Thank you, Arif. I was wondering if you've been able to test or to, let's say, validate the model, right? If this, I think you began motivating this with the global financial crisis, and I don't know if this was one of the policies or things that the central bank or the policymakers in Indonesia implemented, and whether if starting with an earlier reference year, you could see how good the predictions of the model are, or what, or if not, then what could be done to do that. So what do you think?
Yeah, there is really interesting question, because what I exercise right now is actually something that already happened in the market. I mean, the central bank has already implemented the increase in the capital adequacy ratio as a buffer. As also, we know it as the counter-cyclical buffer. The counter-cyclical buffer is the additional buffer that whenever the central bank see the financial market pro-cyclicality is too high, I mean, it's too dangerous, and they have to stabilize. They have to put more capital. But it is what I'm trying to do here is to try to understand all of the transmission. Maybe the magnitude in somehow we already know the magnitude is not really significant, but how the shock is transmitted into the economy, we learn quite a lot with this simulation. But your question is still, I mean, worth to think, because yes, some research says that the impact should be bigger, but through the time we observe that nothing to be worried with this reform until now. The US have done it, EU has done it, some Asian country has done it. Yeah, so I mean, in my point of view, this reform can be continued, but we have to be careful to see whether where we are now. Are we in the expansion path of the financial cycle, or we are going to the trough? We have to clearly define, because in my belief, the result will be different. My models is theoretical models supported by the empirical data, but you know, in the monetary modeling, the time consistency is a problem, right? I mean, yeah, sometimes I say this time is not really, the impact is not really big, but another time when the financial cycle different, the result can be different. I don't know whether I'm answering your question.
No, yeah, I mean, I was, yeah, exactly. So in the sense of that, so you are showing that increasing the basis point, it's achieving, right? It's the objective is to stabilize, to prevent these potential financial crisis effects. So that's good, right? I mean, so it's achieving the purpose. It's having some, other effects, and this is what you're telling us. Okay, there are other effects. In some sense, they are small. You're also telling us what the model says the central bank will have to do to I don't know, to maintain things in equilibrium. And the question was more, yeah, I mean, saying, okay, is this really what happened in real life? And of course, you basically telling me, well, it depends whether you are in the expansion or in the right. And then further is what if the central bank doesn't do what the model tells you to do, right? I mean, if I don't know if they have other objectives in mind. Because that's it. What was my second question is, okay, what about the monetary policy? I mean, what if the model is capturing some of these effects, kind of ceteris paribus, but what if the central bank or policymakers are thinking something else? Like you mentioned, they're trying to hit the economy, try to print more money, and then what does the model will tell us? And
yes, exactly.
So yeah, no, I think it's very interesting, and it definitely helps understanding what this will cause. And I'm just thinking, okay, can we validate the model somehow? Can we apply to other countries and moving it to a previous period where this has happened? You can validate or not the model. What else is needed, right? So I think at this stage you cannot tell us we should do that because it will it will serve the purpose and there's not a big effects elsewhere in the economy, right?
Right.
All right, very well. Are there any other questions from the audience? How are we doing in time, Alfredo?
We still have like 4 minutes.
All right, very good. What are the data sets that you need to calibrate this? So I haven't really much financial with CGE. So what are your requirements?
I prepare a slide to explain that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, do you get them from a central bank? I imagine. Right.
Yeah. So basically, I have two different data set as we traditionally know that the core model, it uses the input-output database. The input it is provided by the statistics office of Indonesia, and I prepare the in the financial side. I prepare a data that I call the financial account and balance sheet Bank Indonesia for Indonesia. It's basically represent this relation, this matrix. This matrix, sorry. Yeah, yeah. This is the new thing in the modeling. So the other financial CGE model that I knew, they use they call it the F sum, the financial sum, but the constraint and modeling that framework is the availability of data is really it's really hard to find because it needs the um, like a task force between the central bank and the statistics office. They have to align the data, but with this data, we can't kind of make a connection. This data, fortunately, is administered in the central bank in the time series, so it's easy for me to update. So what I have done is update the input-output table by simulation, because I have the database of finance in 2018, but my database, my IO data in the 2010. So I update by simulation to 2018, and I match the link by I call it the engineering of the financial account, because the statistic of the finance, it can be distinguished into the market value and the book value. It must be different. When I try to match the real data, the real side economy data and finance data, it won't be matched, because there is a difference.
For questions.
Yeah. Sorry?
We have 1 minute for the question section.
Okay. There is so that there is a difference in the value. So that's the thing that I need to calibrate. So it's basically that normally the financial data should adjust to the real data by the valuation term. I put a variable of the valuation term. Yeah, that's the thing I can explain. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ariev. Let's move on to the next presentation by Chen Pan. If you could share your screen.
Yes. Sorry. Something went wrong with the app.
It's coming up here sometime, I think.
Okay.
I
So
think it's there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Please take it away.
Right. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Chen Pan from Tsinghua University. And it's my honor to introduce our recent work of construction of a MRIO table. In this study, we focused on the construction of a global MRIO with Chinese provinces embedded. This is the outline of my presentation. First, I will give a short introduction of our motivations, and then I will show the databases we used to do this work. And then we will move on to the part of embedding, of how to embed the Chinese provincial MRIOT into the global MRIOT. And then after that, I will give a simple little example of the application of the table. And finally, I will give the conclusions. So with the development of Chinese domestic regional integration and the continuous expand of the opening up, the economic linkages between Chinese provinces, as those between the provinces and international economies are both becoming closer. As the global value chain continues to extend to the subnational regions within the economies, the domestic value chain between Chinese provinces is also nesting into the global value chain. However, currently there's still a lack of systematic models or databases that linking the global input-output table with the subnational input-output tables. So these are our motivations of doing this work. Trying to embed the Chinese provincial multi-regional input-output tables into a global one. Here are the databases we used in this research. We actually planned to use the GTAP MRO for the year 2017 from its 11 databases. It provides 142 countries and regions as well as 65 sectors. But it's a pity that this data set is not available now currently. So we, in order to build the framework of the work, we currently in adopting the MRIO from the Asian Development Bank. It's also for the year 2017 and include 63 countries and regions and 35 sectors. So here we show the basic format of global MROT. Usually it will include the regional, inter-country, intermediate use metrics, and final use metrics. It will also provide the initial input vectors, i.e. the value-added vectors, and also the total input, which equals to the total output. In the future, once the GTAP MRIO for the year 2017 is ready, we will apply this framework to update our table. The second database we used is the Chinese provincial MROT. This table we used here is actually built our team. We have a long history of building Chinese provincial MRO table database. So recently we have updated this database to the year 2017. To build this MRO table, you usually need to use 3 databases. One is the single regional input-output tables of Chinese provinces published by the National Bureau of Statistics, and also the customs data to update the import and export vectors. And we also adopted the railway transportation data between the provinces to estimate the gravity models so that we could estimate the detailed inter-provincial trade matrices. And to balance the table, we use the minimizing cross-entity method so that the initial reliable information could be kept as much as possible. As the third database we used here is the China's customs data. We got the customs data at the HS 8-digit level with the provincial imports tracked by the source countries and the provincial exports tracked by the destination countries. All right, these are the databases we need. In the next step, the first step to embed the MRT is to aggregate the regions in the global MRT. Actually, this is not a necessity. We do this because the scale is too large for the gaps to run, the solver to run. So we decided to aggregate the regions, and these regions are aggregated according to their trade volumes with China. So finally, we had 19 regions, including China. Then what we have to do is to map the 2 sector classifications of the global MRT and the Chinese provincial MRT. we will, in the final model, we will have 27 sectors. Then we need to process the Chinese customers' data. Since what we had was at the HS 8-digit level, so we need to first map the HS 8-digit code with the IO sectors, and we also adopt the BEC classification to further decompose these trade flows into intermediate goods, final consumption goods, as well as final investment goods. After getting these all databases ready, and we could then go to the key step of harmonizing all the databases. First, we need to give an initial estimate based on the 3 databases we have. This figure shows the basic idea of embedding the Chinese provincial MRTs into the global one. On this table in orange is the format of Chinese provincial table. At this in green is the global MRT. At this larger one represents for the embedded MRT. So the left part of the figure shows the matrices that are estimated from a Chinese provincial MRT, which is controlled by the corresponding values from the global MRT of the China part. At the right part of the figure shows those metrics estimated from the customer's data, i.e. the 2 exports metrics as well as 2 imports matrices. Based on these initial estimates, we know that it does not meet the requirement of the balances of IO system. So in the next step, what we do was to rebalance the table. Here we use the least squares method to build the balancing model. This is the objective function. So basically, what we do is to measure the sum of squared errors of the elements, which is weighted by the initial estimates, what we get from the last step. Here the Z's are the elements of the intermediate use matrix. And the Y's are the elements of the final demand matrix. Also for these V's are the elements of the value-added vectors. And here we use the Z bar, Y bar, and V bar to represent the initial estimates of these matrices. All right, and by summing up all these squared errors, we will get the objective value. Then by minimizing the objective value E, together with some control conditions, we could build a model of balancing the table. Here, the first 2 equations shows the controls of the interprovincial matrices, Z for the intermediate use matrices and Y for the final demand matrices. the meaning of this control means that the sum of all the values of the Chinese provinces would equal to the value of China as a whole in the global MROT. So for the Y. Then the equations 3 and 5 are those controls for the imports, and equation 4 and 6 are the controls for the exports. Then we have equation 7 and 8. These two equations are used for row balance and column balance, so the basic balance in the IO model. Finally, we involved equation 9 to control the range of the value-added rate, i.e. the rate, the ratio of value-added over the corresponding total input. All right, this is the balancing model, and after running the model, we will get the embedded MROT balanced. And here I'd like to show an example of the application of the table. Following a paper published in the Economic Systems Research titled "Are Global Value Chains Truly Global?" We did a simple analysis on the participation of Chinese provinces in DVC and DVC. Here, DVC refers to the domestic value chain. So in this paper, the value added of region S could be decomposed into 3 sections. One is the value added that produced domestically and used domestically. Another part is the value added that produced domestically but exported as final goods to another region. And the third section is the is those value added that are exported as intermediate goods to other countries or regions. What we did was to expand this method based on inter-country input output tables to a method based on embedded MRIO tables. So that all the flows of value added of Chinese provinces could be tracked. Here, then in the next slide, I will show a social network analysis of the value added flows of the second part, also which refers to the value added that exported as final goods to another country. This figure shows the network of these countries and the regions as well as Chinese provinces. The size of the nodes represent the strength of the nodes, which was measured by the total volume of this part of the value added. And these edges with arrows shows the value added flow. And the wider the edge is, meaning the larger the flow is. So we could see that USA is an international demand center of value added of final value added exported as final goods. It is closely related to Canada and Mexico, and it also imported a lot of value added in final goods from Asian countries like Japan, India, and Korea, so on. And EU is another international demand center. We could find that it's also imported a lot from the USA, and this DEU represents for Germany. It should be included in EU, but since its trade flow with China is big, so here it is shown singly. We could find that the arrows between EU and DEU is EU is the European Union is the largest demander of Germany's exported value added as final goods, and so that's UK. And which interesting is that Germany is also the largest demander of EU's exports as final demand. All right. Here we could also find that Jiangsu provinces and Guangdong provinces are two domestic demand centers in China. All right, this is the example. Finally, goes to the conclusions. We could find that building embedded MROT is data-intensive work. Currently, we are using the ADB MROT, but in the future, once the GTAP MRT is ready, we will also update this table with the GTAP table. And in the future, we also like to try to expand the years as well as the regions. This table could be used in many research fields. For example, the value-added researches I just showed. As also we could also use it to relate the carbon emissions and environmental issues. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I don't see anything in the chat box, but if you have any questions, please type it up quickly so that we can I can read it to the presenter. In the meantime, I would like to also ask some questions of my own. Chen, so you mentioned that you get the single input-output table. So I understand that from the National Statistical Office, they produce these 31 input-output tables for the 31 provinces that you represent. Is that correct? Chen Pan, are you there? We're losing. Hello, can you hear me?
I'm sorry that I can't hear you.
How about now? Am I hearable? Anybody else? Yep. Or I can chat. That if that makes it
sorry.
easy.
I can't hear anything.
Let me type it up if that's helpful. Can you see the chat box? Okay, so well, my question number one is if the National Statistical Office produces the IO tables for the 31 or so provinces, wouldn't they add up to the country of IO table? Country or national? And if I think you mentioned the trade statistics being, I mean, I think the key typically for provincial trade is that, at least in the US, is really hard to get. So what is the source of provincial trade? I guess in the projects that are happening in the US, that's very hard to obtain, right? They're trying to estimate, they're trying to get a interstate trade. So I guess you can obtain some of international trade into the states of the US or into the provinces of China, but interprovincial trade, I guess that's a little bit harder. So do you have any comments for that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see anything, but I could see that in the chat box there are two questions. Could you hear me? Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry. So question one was that NSO, do you mean NBS, the National Bureau of Statistics? Okay, produces the IoTs for the 30 provinces. The sum of these provincial tables does not equal to the national table. Is this your question? Right. Okay. Okay, so they are not equal. And the second question is the source of the provincial trade. In the provincial tables, the initial single regional provincial tables, it usually provides two columns of provincial trade, but it has a provincial outflow and a provincial inflow, but you can't know where does this flow goes to. So for the more detailed trade matrices, it was estimated by gravity models. So to estimate the gravity model, we adopted the railway transportation data between the provinces. Why they are not equal? Oh, okay. Usually the sum of the not just for the IO table, but for almost all the data sets, the sum of the provinces will not equal to the national one. It's because there are repeated part sections between the provinces. This is one reason, and it's the most important reason. Yes. And for the IO table, especially because the provincial IO tables are compiled by the local statistic department, so they are not controlled nationally. Thank you. Yes, in our study, in the initial estimates estimates, we did use this. You said using the very original single provinces IoT, right? Okay, that's a good suggestion. Thank you. We will try that method and maybe compare the results with our current work. For choosing the global MRT, yes, GTAP MRL for 2014 is ready, but since what we had for the Chinese provinces is for the year 2017, and the last year was for 2012. So that's the reason why we planned to use the GTAP, the most updated GTAP MRL for 2017.
Yeah, no, thank you both presenters. Okay, yeah, so we are almost done with the time. Are there any other questions from the participants that we could type in the chat box for Chenpan? Okay, if not, I guess we can wrap up this session and maybe allow you more time to break and find your next session. Thank you all. Again, this was session number 7. We'll see you virtually soon. Hope to see you soon in person as well.